I was sitting in a divorce courtroom, exhausted, when a woman I'd never met walked in, sat behind me, and slid a small velvet box onto my lap. Inside was my grandmother's engagement ring, the one my brother swore had been lost in a move 4 years ago. The woman leaned forward and whispered, "He sold it to me, and I think you need to know what else he sold." My name is Nicole Hotley, and that ring, my grandmother's engagement ring, was supposed to be the one solid thing in my life. Instead, its sudden reappearance in a courtroom proved my brother Brandon had been lying to me for 4 years. He hadn't lost it in a move. He'd sold it. And the loan guarantee he forged with my signature was about to collapse my divorce, my finances, and my trust in everyone I loved. Let me take you back 4 years, to the day my grandmother pressed that ring into my hand and made me promise something I didn't fully understand at the time. It was a rainy Tuesday in March, and I was 26 years old, sitting beside her hospital bed at St. Joseph's in downtown Portland. She lifted her frail hand from the blanket and pulled me close. Her ring, an Art Deco band from 1928, a central diamond flanked by tiny sapphires, was still on her finger. She worked it off and placed it in my palm. "This ring survived a war, Nicole. It crossed an ocean. Don't ever let it go unless your life depends on it. And never trust anyone who sees only its price tag." I slipped it onto my right hand. It fit perfectly. She died 2 days later. At that time, my world still felt solid. I'd married Ryan the previous summer. He was charming, steady, a financial analyst who seemed to have everything mapped out. My older brother Brandon was different, always between startups, always pitching the next big thing that would make him rich. He'd called me 3 times that year asking for small loans, never more than a few $100s, always with a plan to repay within a month. He never did, but he was family, and my grandmother's advice about price tags hadn't yet clicked. In late March of 2020, Ryan and I moved from our cramped apartment near the Pearl District to a quiet house in Beaverton. Brandon offered to help with the move. I should have been more careful. The ring, still in its original velvet box inside a fabric pouch, was tucked into my jewelry case. I packed that case myself. I watched it go into a moving box labeled Nicole's Closet Fragile. After we settled in, I went to unpack it. The box was there. The jewelry case was there. The fabric pouch was there. The velvet box was gone. I tore through every suitcase, every drawer, every bag. Ryan helped me search for hours. Brandon said he thought he'd seen it on the kitchen counter during unpacking, but maybe it got swept up with the packing paper. We checked the recycling. Nothing. He looked me in the eye and said, "I'm so sorry. It must have been lost in the chaos. I'll keep looking." I believed him because what else do you do when your own brother tells you something? I filed a police report. I called antique shops. Nothing surfaced. My grandmother's ring simply vanished. The marriage began to crack soon after. Ryan grew distant, stayed late at work, became defensive about money. I assumed it was the stress of the move, then the pandemic, then the monotony of being stuck at home. We argued about small things that masked larger resentments I couldn't yet name. By the fall of 2023, we'd stopped trying. I filed for divorce in January. Here's where it gets worse. During the financial discovery process, my attorney Amanda pulled up a strange document. It was a personal guarantee for a $25,000 business loan, dated April 9th, 2020, 2 weeks after the move. The signature on the line, Nicole Hotley, my signature, but I'd never signed it. The loan had been issued by a small online lender, and the funds were wired to a business account for BrightPath Analytics LLC, my brother Brandon's startup. The startup that had failed 6 months later. The loan had defaulted, gone to collections, and because it was taken out during my marriage, Ryan's attorney was now arguing that it was a marital debt I had to share. I was staring at a $25,000 liability I didn't create, signed with a forgery I couldn't yet prove, all while trying to finalize my divorce. I confronted Ryan. He looked at the floor and said, "Brandon needed the money. I thought you knew. He told me you agreed." Then he paused and added, "I thought it was just a favor between siblings." I checked old emails. There it was, a chain between Ryan and Brandon from April 8th, the night before the loan was signed. Ryan wrote, "She'll never go for this. She's too sentimental about that ring." Brandon replied, "I'll handle Nicole. Just make sure your bank details are off the paperwork." They'd conspired, my husband, my brother, and the ring, I still didn't know the connection. Not yet. On the morning of May 10th, I walked into the Washington County Courthouse with a binder full of bank statements, a forged loan document, and a hollow feeling in my chest. I was about to sit through a hearing that would either saddle me with half a fraudulent debt or force me to prove that my own brother committed a felony. I was exhausted. I was alone. And as I took my seat in the front row of that cold, wood-paneled room, I had no idea that my grandmother's ring was just seconds away from coming home. The courtroom was nearly empty. The judge was reviewing papers. Then the heavy wooden door at the back creaked open. I turned. A woman I'd never seen before stepped inside. She was middle-aged with a calm expression and a tan trench coat. In her hands, she carried a small black velvet box. I recognized it instantly. My heart stopped. The woman leaned forward and whispered, "He sold it to me, and I think you need to know what else he sold." I opened the box. Inside, under the courtroom's fluorescent lights, was my grandmother's ring. The sapphires caught the light exactly the way I remembered. I couldn't speak. The judge was still reviewing papers at the bench, the clerk typing quietly. I turned around and stared at this stranger who had just handed me back 4 years of loss. Her name was Rebecca Morrow. She told me she'd bought the ring from Brandon in April of 2020, just 2 weeks after our move. He'd met her at a coffee shop in Lake Oswego, the kind of place with reclaimed wood tables and $12 lattes. He introduced himself as a tech founder. He told her the ring was an estate piece, recently inherited, and he needed quick cash to bridge a funding gap before his series Around closed. He asked for $14,000. She was a collector, knew the value of a 1928 Art Deco band with original sapphires. She paid in cash that afternoon. No receipt, no contract. Just 2 strangers and a velvet box sliding across a table. Rebecca paused and looked down at her hands. She told me that for 2 years, she wore the ring on special occasions. She never questioned its origins because Brandon had seemed so confident, so polished. But in the summer of 2022, she decided to have the ring appraised for insurance. The appraiser took one look at the inscription inside the band, 3 initials and a date, VEM 1928, and advised her to check stolen property databases. That night, she found my police report, lost during a residential move. Beaverton, Oregon, a grandmother's heirloom, my contact information. She called the number on the report. It was disconnected, so Rebecca started digging. She hired a private investigator. She traced the ring's history back through my family. My grandmother, Vivian Alois McAllister, who had been given the ring by my grandfather on their wedding day in 1931, who had worn it through the Depression and a war and 52 years of marriage, and who had handed it to me on her deathbed with one instruction: never trust anyone who sees only its price tag. Rebecca found that out. And the more she learned about Vivian, the more she felt sick about what she'd done. Then the investigator uncovered something else. While tracking Brandon's business filings, he discovered a loan guarantee document dated April 9th, 2020, the day after the ring sale. BrightPath Analytics LLC, the same startup Brandon had claimed needed bridge funding. The loan was for $25,000. The guarantor, Nicole Hotley. My signature, forged. Rebecca's investigator confirmed it wasn't mine by comparing it to public records. He found that the loan had been issued by a predatory online lender based in Delaware, one that rarely verified signatures. And he found trace communications showing that Ryan, my husband, had been copied on the loan terms the same week it was approved. Ryan had known from the beginning. I sat in that courtroom, the ring clutched in my hand, and the full weight of what she'd said settled over me. Brandon hadn't just stolen a family heirloom. He'd built a fraud on top of that theft, using my name, my credit, my marriage, as scaffolding for a startup that was doomed from the start. And Ryan, the man I'd married, the man I'd trusted to help me search for the ring, the man who had held me while I cried, had known about it. He had probably encouraged it. The email I'd found the week before made sense now. She'll never go for this. She's too sentimental about that ring. He wasn't warning Brandon. He was clearing the way. The judge called my case. The room quieted. Ryan and his attorney sat at the opposite table, 10 feet from me. My lawyer, Amanda, leaned in and asked why a stranger had just handed me a velvet box. I whispered the short version. Her eyes widened, then sharpened. She stood just as Ryan's attorney began speaking about the BrightPath loan, calling it a marital debt that I had co-signed willingly. "Your Honor," Amanda said, raising a hand, "we have new evidence of theft and forgery that directly impacts this debt and the credibility of the opposing party. I request a brief continuance to present this to the court." The judge, an older woman with tired eyes and a sharp gavel, looked from Amanda to the velvet box still open in my lap. Counsel approach. And as Amanda walked to the bench with Rebecca's phone number already typed into her contacts, I turned and looked at Ryan. His face had gone pale. He knew what was about to happen, and for the first time I saw fear behind his eyes. The ring had come home, but the truth was just starting to unravel. The judge granted a 30-minute recess. I sat in the hallway with Rebecca while Amanda disappeared into a conference room, already on the phone with the private investigator. Rebecca told me everything she'd uncovered, and the deeper she went, the colder my blood ran. Brandon hadn't just sold the ring. He'd used the cash infusion to open a business bank account, then immediately applied for the $25,000 loan using my name, my social security number, and a forged signature that looked almost genuine. The loan application listed me as a co-founder of BrightPath Analytics, with a fabricated equity stake and a fake employment history. He'd even submitted a photo of my driver's license, taken from my wallet during the move. The lender, a fly-by-night operation called Velocity Fund, never verified anything. They wired the money within 48 hours. Brandon burned through the cash in 4 months on marketing, office space, and a salary to himself. When the startup collapsed, he defaulted, and the debt went to a collections agency that eventually traced it to the only name they could find, Nicole Hotley. But here's where it gets darker. Ryan didn't just know about the loan. He had actively negotiated it. Rebecca's investigator had found an email chain from April 8th where Ryan wrote to the loan officer. "My wife's credit is better than mine, but she's fully on board. Call her at this number to confirm." The number wasn't mine. It was a burner phone Brandon had purchased at a Walmart in Tigard. When Velocity Fund called to verify the guarantee, a woman answered, a woman who identified herself as Nicole Hotley, gave my date of birth, and verbally authorized the loan. I'd been impersonated. By whom I still don't know. A girlfriend. A hired voice. The recording was still in the lender's files. Amanda emerged from the conference room with a look I'd never seen on her face before. She knelt beside my chair and said, "Nicole, this isn't just a civil debt. This is identity theft, forgery, wire fraud, and possibly conspiracy. If that impersonation recording exists, your brother is looking at federal charges. And if Ryan helped facilitate any of it, he could face charges too." She paused. "I need to ask you something difficult. Are you prepared to testify against your brother and your ex-husband?" I looked down at the ring in my palm. My grandmother's words echoed, "Never trust anyone who sees only its price tag." Brandon had seen $4,000 in immediate cash plus a $25,000 loan he never intended to repay. Ryan had seen a way to clean up the marital balance sheet. If the loan was in my name, it could be argued as my separate debt, freeing him from more alimony. They'd both looked at the ring, looked at me, and seen price tags. But Rebecca had seen something else. She'd spent 2 years and nearly $5,000 of her own money tracking me down, not because she wanted a reward, but because when she learned Vivian's story, how the ring had survived a war, how it had been passed down with love, she said she couldn't wear it anymore. "Some things," she said quietly, "shouldn't be for sale." She opened her phone and showed me photos. She'd driven to St. Joseph's Hospital. She'd visited my grandmother's grave. She'd even found an old newspaper clipping of Vivian and her husband at the Oregon coast in 1946, the ring visible on her hand. Rebecca had done all this out of guilt, yes, but also out of a strange, unexpected love for a woman she'd never met. She had become, against all reason, the guardian of my grandmother's memory. Amanda went back into the courtroom and told the judge we had evidence of criminal fraud that directly affected the marital asset division. Ryan's attorney objected, but the judge stared at Ryan and said, "I'm going to allow this evidence, and counsel, I'd advise your client to think very carefully about what he says next." The hearing was continued for 2 weeks, pending formal submission of the investigator's findings. That night I called Brandon. He answered on the third ring, cheerful as always. "Hey sis, what's up?" I told him I knew about the ring. Silence. I told him I knew about the loan, the forged signature, the impersonation. More silence than a shaky exhale. "Nicole, I was going to pay you back. The startup was supposed to take off. I just needed a little seed money." I asked him about the ring. He said, "I figured you'd eventually get something nicer. Grandma's ring was old, sentimental. You'd move on." I hung up without saying goodbye. Within an hour, he'd texted me 7 times, alternating between apologies, justifications, and threats. The last one read, If you report this, I go to prison. Is that what you want for your brother? I sat alone in my apartment, the ring on the table in front of me, and asked myself that exact question. But before I could answer, Rebecca called. Her voice was urgent. Nicole, I found something else. When Brandon sold me the ring, he mentioned he had other family assets he was liquidating. I didn't think much of it then. But my investigator just discovered a second loan, a $10,000 line of credit taken out in your mother's name, dated 3 months after the ring sale. Your mother didn't know about that either, did she? My mother. Brandon had stolen from our mother. The fraud was bigger than I'd imagined. And Rebecca, a stranger who had walked into my divorce hearing with a velvet box, had just uncovered a pattern of theft that was about to tear my entire family apart. I had 2 weeks until the next hearing. 2 weeks to decide whether my brother deserved prison and whether my husband deserved to lose everything. I sat alone in my apartment that night with the ring on the table and Rebecca's words echoing in my head. Brandon had stolen from our mother. My brother wasn't just a desperate entrepreneur who made one terrible mistake. He was a predator who'd worked through his own family, taking whatever he could liquidate, and he'd only stopped because he got caught. I made the call at 11 p.m. not to Brandon, to Amanda. I'm ready. Whatever this takes, I'm not protecting him anymore. The next morning, Amanda filed a formal motion with the court, attaching the investigator's report, the forged loan documents, the impersonation recording, and a sworn statement from Rebecca detailing the ring's purchase and her subsequent search for me. She also filed a criminal referral with the Washington County District Attorney's Office, outlining identity theft, forgery, wire fraud, and elder financial abuse. The second loan, $10,000 in my mother's name, was the tipping point. My mother, Elaine, had no idea it existed. When I called her that afternoon, she listened in silence for nearly a minute, then said, I thought he needed help with rent. The divorce hearing resumed 2 weeks later in the same wood-paneled courtroom. This time, the room felt different. Ryan's attorney had gone from confident to cautious. Ryan himself couldn't look at me. Amanda presented the evidence in sequence. First the police report from 2020, then the ring's chain of custody via Rebecca, then the BrightPath loan application, the forged signature, the burner phone records, the voice recording where a woman claimed to be me. Then, for good measure, she presented the second loan in my mother's name, filed under a different lender but with the same pattern, Brandon's business listed as beneficiary, a forged signature, and a burner phone verification. Ryan's attorney tried to argue that Ryan was merely a bystander, that he'd been misled by Brandon like everyone else. Then Amanda played the email Ryan had sent. My wife's credit is better than mine, but she's fully on board. Call her at this number to confirm. The judge stared at Ryan. You provided a false phone number to a lender so they would not reach your wife. Did you know which number it was? Ryan stammered, then said, Brandon gave me that number. I assumed it was hers. The judge set her pen down. Mr. Hotley, I've been on this bench for 17 years. I know when someone is lying to me. You participated in a fraud against your own wife. That will be reflected in this court's rulings. She declared the $25,000 BrightPath loan null and void as to me, with full liability assigned to Brandon and, where provable, to Ryan as a co-conspirator. She ordered an immediate correction to my credit report. She then divided the remaining marital assets, but because of Ryan's misconduct, she awarded me a significantly larger share, enough to cover my legal fees and then some. As we stood to leave, she added, and I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for criminal review. This court does not ignore felonies committed in its presence. Ryan's face went gray. He walked out without a word, his attorney trailing behind him. I never spoke to him again. The criminal investigation took months. Brandon was eventually charged with 2 counts of identity theft, forgery, and elder financial abuse. He took a plea deal, 18 months of probation, full restitution to our mother and to the second lender, and a permanent felony record that would follow him into every job interview for the rest of his life. He also had to surrender any remaining business assets. When I saw him at the courthouse after his arraignment, he didn't apologize. He just looked at me with hollow eyes and said, You could have just let me pay you back. I walked past him and didn't look back. My mother, Elaine, took it harder. She'd always believed Brandon's stories about his brilliant startup, his near misses, his bad luck with investors. Now she had to confront that her son had stolen her identity to fund a fantasy. She and I spent 3 weekends going through her credit reports, closing fraudulent accounts, filing disputes. It was painful, but it brought us closer. One evening, she handed me a small wooden box I'd never seen before. "This was your grandmother's jewelry box," she said. "She wanted you to have it. I'd forgotten it was in the attic." It was walnut with a faded velvet lining and a tiny brass latch, the perfect home for a ring that had survived so much. Rebecca and I stayed in touch. She refused any compensation for the $14,000 she'd paid Brandon. "I bought stolen goods," she said. "That's on me, not you." Instead, she asked if she could visit the cemetery with me sometime. On a cool October morning, we stood together at Vivian's grave. I wore the ring. Rebecca laid a small bouquet of lavender on the headstone. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. The last thing I did on the anniversary of my grandmother's death was open the jewelry box my mother had found. Inside, tucked under the lining, was a folded piece of paper. I hadn't noticed it before. It was a letter, written in Vivian's handwriting, dated the year she gave me the ring. The second line read, "Your brother will ask for this someday, don't give it to him. Some people love things and some people love what things can buy. You, Nicole, are the first kind. Stay that way." I carefully placed the ring inside the box, closed the latch, and set it on my dresser where I could see it every morning. It had traveled across an ocean, survived a war, survived a theft, and survived a fraud. Now it was exactly where it belonged. I don't think of this as a story about a ring. It's a story about what we're willing to overlook when the person betraying us shares our last name. For 4 years, I believed my brother was careless but loving. I believed my husband was distant but honest. The truth was right there, in a missing velvet box, in a loan document I never signed, but I wasn't ready to see it. My grandmother saw it decades before I did. She knew that some people in our family would see her ring and calculate its market value before they remembered whose finger it had been on. I got the ring back. I got my credit restored. I got away from a marriage built on secrets. But the thing that still sits with me is Rebecca, a stranger who felt so much guilt over buying stolen jewelry that she spent 2 years and thousands of dollars to make it right. She didn't owe me anything. She chose to do the hard thing anyway. That's the part I hold on to when I think about trust. It doesn't have to come from blood. Sometimes it walks into a courtroom in a tan trench coat and hands you back your history. If someone you trusted ever traded your memories for their ambitions, or if a stranger ever surprised you with kindness you didn't expect, I'd want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button so you don't miss the next one. Check the description for more stories like this.